Good morning, everyone. I'm Brian Smith, Chair of the TCHC's Board Governance, Communications, and Human Resources Committee. Welcome to the public session of today's committee meeting. In light of the need for social distancing to limit the spread of COVID-19, we are holding this committee meeting virtually. First of all, let me begin by acknowledging the land that each of us is on, and we hold this virtual meeting, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now the home of many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. During the public session, there are several reports for information, including the standing report on City Council directions requiring board attention, the annual compliance report for 2020, and the annual update on subsidiaries. There is also one report for approval, the appointment of the GCHRC Vice Chair report. Also, committees hear deputations, and members of the public wanting to depute on an agenda item. I got that, Paula.
I like that one. There you go.
So members of the public wanting to depute on the agenda item on today's agenda had the option to do so by either submitting a written deputation or being teleconferenced into today's meeting to orally depute to the board members on the committee. There were no requests to depute on today's meeting. I will now review the public consent agenda items and public regular agenda items as listed on the agenda, and I would request if there are any other items to be added. Otherwise, a motion to accept the agenda. Thanks, Debbie. Seconded by, I don't see everybody, so I can't see if you put your hand up or not. Paula, you're the only one I see, so I'm going to ask you to second the agenda.
That's good.
Thank you. All those in favor? Assume the motion is carried. Is that correct, Dara?
I saw Marcel and Uba's hands up. Debbie, yes, so it's carried unanimously.
Okay. Declarations of a conflict of interest. Would members of the Governance, Communication, Human Resource Committee please indicate any agenda item in which they have a conflict of interest, together with the nature of that conflict? Seeing no hands, I will note that there are no conflicts of interest were declared for any agenda item. The committee, please have a motion to approve the public consent agenda. Okay, Marcel, seconded by Uba. All those in favor? Sarah, do we need to note that we've had two committee members who were not able to attend this meeting. We need to do that.
No, I don't believe that we need to take that step this morning. I think we can note that
They were unable, unfortunately, to
yes.
attend. Okay. Business arising from the public meeting. Item 3 is business arising from the public meeting minutes, and action item update, which is put forward for the committee's information. Are there any questions arising out of those actions that anybody would like to speak
Yes.
to?
Yes,
Paula? Yes?
I believe it. It's page 8. I'm pretty sure it's that. It's still having. It's under the biennial human resources report. Is that in front of us right now, or is that for later? Or is that the minutes? What's the minutes?
It's the minutes.
Maybe the minutes.
Okay. Did we do that already?
Yes.
Because I just have a question about it. Sorry, we'll have to reopen so I can ask it.
So we'll reopen the minutes, and you
Thanks.
want
I'll
to
move it.
raise your question.
Yeah, we were at the board meeting of June 15th, 2021. On page 8, it says the breakdown of staff who've been employed for 5 years or less to identify the reason for turnover, etc. Why the rate of turnover is so high in the CSU, diversity index, etc. I don't think we got that on the 15th because I held that and asked questions. Maybe I'm missing something. I think that's still in play.
Is I tell you the truth, I can't remember. So are there other committee members who have
I'm
that,
trying to recall, were we not told that you didn't have the information and you were, or am I speaking about something else? That you were about to do another staff survey that will capture the information we were requesting?
So if I could, through the chair, yes, I did provide, I provided some information that there's different components to the question. So on the workforce demographics, I have provided briefing notes indicating that a fulsome workforce survey has not been undertaken, that we will be doing that this year, and then we will be in a position to report on the demographics of the company as a whole. That's in regards to the questions around the CSU. And then in regards to the breakdown of the tenure of management staff, I provided a briefing note on this agenda that provides some additional information on the tenure of management staff, particularly 5 years or less. Because I think I had raised the question myself last time, whether the number 253 that was included of management staff with 5 years or less could have included those who were not new to the company, but new to their positions. And so in the briefing note that I have included today, I have clarified, provided further clarity on the information on the tenure of management staff.
I must confess that I can't really find that briefing note unless it came later.
It did come later, Councillor. It was distributed yesterday afternoon at about 10 to 2.
So that's a bit of a problem when we get things late, because then all the stuff's in there already.
It's the last email around today's meeting that came from Sonia yesterday.
Anyway, because I don't
like,
have
Councillor,
it.
I could highlight for you, in particular, the sort of the red flag was the 253 management staff with 5 years or less, which certainly, appears to be a high proportion of the overall management staff. So I provided additional information that that I thought the committee would be interested to know. So of the first 495 employees that are considered management non-union, it's worth noting that 235 of those are people leaders. They supervise other staff. And the balance are either individual contributors, professional staff, or non-union exempt staff. And then when we look at those with the 5 years or less of service, of the 253, we actually did further analysis and saw that 164 of those were new hires to TCHC. 89 were existing employees who had been promoted either temporarily or permanent into management roles in that time period. So the 253 is reduced quite a bit from the first breakdown that I provided to you at the last committee meeting.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find it. That's the demographics for the community safety unit.
No, I believe that actually Barbara is speaking to the next briefing note on public action item number 5.
Okay, then let's.
Can you pull that up, Sonia? And if you can expand it.
Barbara, why don't you walk people through this briefing note? I know you just did, but with the text in front of people, it might be easier.
Yes, absolutely. This briefing note provides additional detail to the information that was included in the HR biannual update. And specifically, I was asked to report back on further breakdown or analysis on the years of service for management and non-union employees. The first thing that I highlighted here is that of our total number of management and non-union staff of 495, 495 are comprised of the following. 235 are people leaders, managers. They're responsible for supervising staff. 160 are management, but they are individual contributors. They do not supervise other staff. And then another 100 are non-union exempt staff. So the tenure of the 495 employees is reflected in this chart. You would have seen this table in the previous HR division update. And we did a breakdown to show the tenure of the management and exempt employees. So specifically, we had the 253 that were deemed management with 5 years or less service. And that was raised, that was noticed at the last meeting, and some questions were asked that it seemed to be a relatively high number, which I would agree it is. I went back and did further analysis to understand the 253, were they truly all new employees to the company, or were some of them employees who were previously in union positions that moved into management? And so, in fact, through the further analysis, we learned that 164 of the 253 were new hires to the company, and 89 were existing employees who had been promoted into new management roles. And then of the 164 that were new, 37 were actually brand new management positions that had been created in various divisions, including ops, CSU, ITS in particular, as well as some other areas. And then the remaining management employees with less than 5 years of service were hired to fill positions that would have been vacated through attrition, exits due to retirements, resignations, or potentially terminations.
Any questions?
It's Debbie, Brian. Barbara, in terms of the 160, the 37 new brand new management positions, how many were developed in CSU?
I don't have that breakdown,
Sorry?
Debbie.
Okay.
Barbara, maybe I
Can
can
you pull down the document?
So in the board approved restructuring back in September of 2019, we collapsed two divisions, asset management and tenant services, into operations with a new structure. So we had 3 general managers. Each general manager has 4 managers, a couple of supervisors. So there was a whole new management structure that HR had to recruit for, which meant people had to apply and go through and be appointed into those positions. So a very significant number of that 37 being as a director of the Board of Restructuring in 2019.
Sheila and Barbara, if you scroll down farther, it says CSU 10. Is that the number that Debbie was looking for?
No, that number lower down was just the recruitment transactions in the first quarter of 2021. I think Director Debbie's question was about the positions created with 5 years or less of service in the CSU in particular, which, while I don't have the exact number here, I'm certainly happy to follow up with you and provide that information.
That's great, because based on what Sheila has said, I would expect that the majority of positions were created in operations, given that you amalgamated two. But I do want to know what the CSU breakdown is. And this is one area as well. I would love demographics in terms of out of the new hires, what the racial and gender breakdowns are.
And there is a briefing note number 4 that speaks to that, and I'd suggest that Barbara walk us through that as well when we're finished with number 5, okay?
Thank you, Sheila.
Any further questions?
It's me, back at table 2, that's the recruitment activity for Q1 2022. And
2021.
Sorry, I'm a year ahead of myself. So within Q1 2021, there were 155 people hired for operations and 30 hired for development. Is that correct?
So, so I'll clarify that chart refers to not just recruitment activity. It refers to recruitment related transactions, and it could include extensions of existing temporary assignments. So it's a report that reflects more of the activity and productivity of the recruitment team. And going forward, what I plan to do is break down this information in a more meaningful manner for committee so that you will see the difference between temporary hires versus permanent hires and extensions, so it's not misleading. This question was raised at the last meeting about development in particular, that recruitment of 30 seemed high. So we went back and did a review of that. And what we learned is that of the 30, there was a requisition for 18 extensions of program leader positions that was attributed to development incorrectly. It was actually part of facilities management. And so the correct number for development was 12, which included some recruitment into vacancies and some extensions of existing acting assignments to make up the total of 12. So the correct number for development is 12 and not 30. And then the facilities management number goes up by 18. But again, those were extensions of existing temporary assignments.
I guess I'm just interested in how you moved. What would that be at facilities? Those 18 people, what would they be doing? Why were they in development in the first place? And what would the role be? The same role that they've now being ascribed to operations.
So I'll clarify. They were not in development. Yes, they were never in development. It was an error in the way the data was entered into the system.
Oh.
So
okay.
the requisition should have showed facilities management, but it was incorrectly entered as development. Okay. So it was an error.
So this is correct. The chart needs to be corrected, is what you're telling me.
Correct.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Correct.
So
yeah.
And where is there? is there a spot? Oh, facilities management 14 at 1832. Okay, I see that. And for operations, is that partially due to taking on the contracted out buildings and hiring our own staff? Or what would that be, such a high number?
It would reflect a lot of movement within in further implementing the positions in the restructuring. And I don't know if John or Sheila want to add to this. So it does not reflect all new hiring at all. It would be extensions of temporary assignments. It would be movement of staff within the division to further implement the restructuring.
So I just need to know the net new positions, Barbara, of that 235. And those operations, let's go back from that chart because operations are union generally. What's the net new jobs then? Up from the first, table 1.
So I want to clarify because there is a difference when we talk about jobs versus people.
Okay.
The chart on this table 1 was the tenure of management employees. That was the request that was made to committee, was to comment on the tenure of management employees. And so the 253 management staff with 5 years or less, we said 164 were new hires, but that's not new positions. Of those 164, 37 were hired into new positions. But I think if you're asking a different question, Councillor, which would be a breakdown of
37 of the
net
164. Okay. I know that this is something that Deputy Mayor is very interested in, so this will be proceeding to, obviously, to the.
So can we ask that those modifications in the report can be brought back to the September 8th meeting? I think that's our next meeting.
And
is that satisfactory, Paula?
Yes. So the 89 who were promoted into new management roles, were they backfilled? So this doesn't show the backfilling because we have increased the complement considerably, I believe. Barbara, I can't see you now. But therefore, if 89 people are moving up, 89 people are being hired to replace, I would think. There's no redundant positions. So this is just part of this conversation. And then I'd like to have that clarified. The other thing is, what is the ratio? Let's take Wood Green, for example, as a housing provider or a Ottawa Housing. What's the net ratio? And I think this is something people are going to ask, so I will let you know
we do have that, I believe.
Pardon?
We do have that, I believe, on our future reporting. That Sheila, can you remind me? I think we've got that coming up later this year, where we were going to look at other municipal nonprofits and see what is that. I think that's what Paula was referring to.
Correct. We were asked. We're providing that information in Q1 of 2022, and we were asked to bring to the next governance meeting a work plan for how we're going to do that. So a mandate, who we're going out to, how we're going to do it, to give the committee an overview of what it is that we're reporting back on in Q1, so that when we report back, it hits the question.
Okay.
Sonia?
So.
And if I could, Brian, just one more piece of information. The councillor is asking about the increase in complement over the years. And I did provide a pretty detailed briefing note to BIFAC, a meeting past. We could bring that information to governance if that is also of interest. There has been a significant increase in operating funding. We have hired additional frontline staff. We lay out what we've hired year over year and how they've been funded. I think that would be helpful.
Okay, so in terms of the plan you're referring to, would that be coming to the September meeting and the information coming in the first quarter of next year?
That's correct.
Paula, you have other comments on that?
Yeah, I just, these two should actually kind of be in tandem, but we're going to be discussing that. I think this will be important information in general, that we see the ratio in other housing companies. I don't understand why it takes so long to find out what the ratio is, but and how maybe somebody in the city can help, like Doug Rollins can help, because they have those relationships with all the other housing providers and should be able to quickly get that kind of thumbnail, at least a first scan. Because anybody who has any RGIs has a reporting relationship with the city. And that's the same in any city.
From my perspective, it would be important to ensure that we are actually comparing apples to apples, because every place may
have different services
or organize their functions slightly different, and so we want to be sure that we're doing an actual an accurate comparison. So if Doug Rollins can help, or there are other city staff, I'm sure Sheila can reach out to them and ask them to assist. But for sure, we want to make sure it says apples to apples comparison as possible. But
I will just tell you that I would suggest this get done faster than slower, because part of the budget process at the city under COVID is to really be checking, because we're very much in the hole, checking everything in all of the city-owned businesses, subsidiaries, agencies, and in the city staff. So I'm just giving everybody a big heads up here. This is worth having information on early.
So Councillor, we'll bring the breakdown of hiring back to, I think we went back to 2014, year over year, what the additional hiring has been, what the corresponding increase in subsidy, in what areas the new hires were made, and what the percentage of management versus frontline hiring has been. We'll bring that back to September's committee meeting, along with the plan to make sure that we do a really solid comparison of our staffing levels to other housing providers.
Thank you.
I know it's because previous experience, certainly definitions of what is management and what is operations, and who falls in what box is important. Obviously, every corporation wants to make them look in the best as possible. So it's important to make sure that we're comparing ourselves in an equal manner to those organizations, whether that be Ottawa or Hamilton or whatever the other group is that we're looking at. So, but my experience is that definitions do count. Any other comments? But we'll be bringing this back in terms of the process at the September meeting, and as quick as possible, bringing back the comparative information following that.
Brian, just a quick question. Barbara, would you remind us when the target date is for the comprehensive survey, staff survey, demographic survey, please?
Yes, we intend to launch the survey early September.
And
so we're doing
with a report back to this committee by
Q1 of 2022.
Thank you.
Brian, could
Sure.
Barbara walk us through, if we're finished with briefing note number 5, could Barbara walk us through briefing note number 4?
Sure,
on
because it's
data for CSU.
yes, sure.
Would that
Do you want to? Okay, Barbara,
can we put that
up?
Sorry, I'm just opening up mine. I didn't know if we're going to share the screen. Great. So this briefing note was prepared in response to the request to provide demographic data for the Community Safety Unit. And this request was made at the May GCHRC meeting, as well as asking questions the number of staff, the demographic data of the CSU staff, those carried out, and the demographic data of CSU staff hired to carry out work of the violence reduction program, as well as the number of new hires in the VRP who have a policing background. There had also been similar requests made at Tenant Services Committee, and there is a briefing note that's going forward to that committee meeting next week. But I guess I want to comment in a nutshell, and I have provided this information at the last GCHRC meeting, that to date, Toronto Community Housing has not carried out a fulsome workforce survey, a fulsome and proper workforce survey. And what I mean by that is taking the time to understand what the right questions to ask, the right terminology to use, to engage our employees, to help them understand why we're asking these questions, to ensure that these questions are asked and that the data is collected in a manner that will be confidential and that the information will be secure, and where we control who has access to the information, how the information will be used. And all of those parts are critical to encouraging and getting the buy-in of your staff, the comfort level for them to be willing to respond. And so to date, Toronto Community Housing has not done that. And I do understand that there have been some efforts taken, perhaps about a year ago, to collect data about the demographics of staff in the CSU as a result of a request made by committee. I don't know exactly what steps were taken to collect the data, but I will be very candid to say that I'm concerned, I would be concerned that we didn't necessarily pay attention to all of those important things that I've just mentioned in terms of ensuring that we're administering a survey that allows people, firstly, the option to respond, that allows them to do so in a way that they feel will be confidential and safe. And so that is why we don't have demographic data. And so we've been asked, you know, there, even in the short time since I've been here, this question has come up a number of times. And what I've said is, as part of our fulsome equity, diversity, and inclusion survey strategy that we are building in the Human Resources Division to roll out company-wide, one of the most important first activities is rolling out this workforce survey. And the workforce survey will provide us with this baseline information, which we will then use to help understand current state, where the opportunities are for us to focus our attention. In carrying out the survey, we want to be really careful about the way we do it. Like I said, we want to do it in a way where our staff understand our intentions behind doing it and how we're going to use the information, who's going to have access to the information. So those are all details that we're working through right now. So in a nutshell, my response is we aren't in a position to provide fulsome, accurate information about CSU or any other unit in TCH at this moment, because we haven't properly collected that information. But we intend to do that with the start of our first survey, and then we will do it on a regular basis so that we always have the ability to report out on what the demographics are. And that's a very important tool to allow us to measure the effectiveness of the various strategies that we undertake, whether it's related to the CABR strategy or other efforts that we put in place to enhance equity, diversity, and inclusion in the company. The workforce survey provides a wonderful tool to collecting and allowing us to analyze and see where the gaps are, where underrepresentation exists, and allows us the opportunity to know where we need to delve deeper and have an understanding of why, why don't we have sufficient representation of persons with disabilities or biracialized employees or so on. So it will help inform us on the programs and strategies we want to undertake, but we don't have that today.
However, you do have the number of CSUs that have a police background. You have that.
Yes.
You don't have to do a survey.
We would have that from the hiring information. So we would have to go in. So we don't keep a record, Councillor, that we don't track that. But if we needed to go and collect it.
I understand that.
Yes,
that's
and
one
that's
of the
the
questions.
exactly.
It's not answered. It's not answered at all, even with what you've mentioned. So where is
including
that?
the briefing notes to TSC. Yeah, so that's one of the questions we've been asking as well.
So I don't understand why that one's not answered. I understand your workplace survey. We have had other information that was sent to the committee previously, but very clearly, who comes from a background, how many are there new management positions that have been filled in that way? I don't see what the big problem is in getting that info.
Yeah,
It's
who has
been
a
asked
policing
for over and
background
over and over.
Yeah, who has a policing background and in what position have they been hired into at CSU? And this is not coming out of the blue, right? This is coming because we are continuing to hear from tenants that the hiring at CSU continue to be non-racialized police officer background. They've all been hired in senior positions. That basically CSU is recreating a police culture by having titles like chief and sergeant and those kinds of things. And we've had this conversation. As a nonprofit social housing, we should not be creating a police force within our social housing.
So the board has directed that, or we have an approved Community Safety Advisory Committee. Those are all excellent questions that will be considered through that committee. And Dara, I believe we have a date for that first committee meeting?
No. This isn't going to end well here. That doesn't have to wait for that committee. That information should be there for that committee. That information should be here for the board.
That's right.
Councillor, that information will be there for that committee.
It belongs to the board. The board has asked for that. The board would send. This is a board committee. It's just very frustrating. Sorry, Barbara, you might not have been in all these meetings before. This has been asked for over and over again. I do not understand the problem with getting that. How many people are in the CSU?
272.
And
272.
And in what position do they hold?
Okay, good.
And then there's only people that were hired after 2019. That should be simple.
So the numbers in CSU are 272. And is the second question, what is the category management and frontline in CSU?
How many have a police background and what positions do they hold in CSU?
Okay, we can provide that. We have that information. So number of individuals in CSU by title and how many have a background in policing.
I think it's how many since we started with the new VRP have been hired, and how many come from policing backgrounds, and what are the titles that they hold.
So, but you could do that by giving us a comprehensive list of all the 270.
You know what, Brian? The question has been about the new complement over and over and over again. That's easier to do than to do 272. So I just think we've been asking for that. Debbie has asked for that. I've asked for that. Uba's asked for that.
We're all asked for that, yeah.
So that's in the last, what is it, 3 years?
Since 2019, whatever that time period is, or whenever the VRP hiring started. So Sheila will know the date. 2018.
Hiring in
Yeah.
2018.
2018?
We can certainly pull that, information together.
Let's start with that. So we're not waiting for such a lot of work. That is easy to do. I'm just saying it should be here, and it's not.
So if you could pull that together and circulate it, and then it can be on the agenda for the next meeting. If we
Do
the
that.
sooner you circulate it, better.
And Dara, do we have a date for the first Community Safety Advisory Committee meeting?
Yes, the date that we've canvassed with committee members is July 20th.
Okay.
And just to be clear,
Oh,
sorry, Councillor. The information that's being requested is different from the information that was part of attachment number 2 to item 5 on the Tenant Services Committee meeting of March 24th. In that report, the Tenant Services Committee was advised that while CSU does not track hiring by former occupation, a general review shows that 58 management and management and management exempt staff, 16 were previously employed as police in Ontario or elsewhere in the world, and that of that 16, 7 are not directly involved in patrol, and of the 7, 3 are not in a special constable role. Does
Yeah,
that
we should
provide some of the information that this committee is looking for?
No, it tells us what they're not. We want to know how many are in senior roles, exactly what we just said. How many folks have been hired since the VRP? How many have police backgrounds, and what positions do they hold? If you can guess demographics, that will be great too.
And I think for the reasons that Barbara has described, that part would be problematic.
That was a bit tongue in cheek there.
Sorry?
Okay.
We're trying.
Said that was a bit tongue in cheek.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. So Barbara, are there any clarifications that you require more? No? Okay.
No, I'm clear on the information, and we will get that to you.
So, I lose track, but is that are there any other items, business arising actions other than the ones we've discussed? If not, can I please have a motion to receive the action items with the additions and questions that have been added for future meetings? So, you want more discussion? Is there a motion?
move it. I'm moving it.
Okay, Paula, seconded by Debbie. Those in favor? It's carried. So move on to item number 4, the appointment of the TCHRC Vice Chair, as just to refresh the public. The board has decided to ensure continuity by having all committees with a chair and a vice chair. And so each committee has been requested to appoint or elect a vice chair to for that committee. And at this point, as committee chair, we have a motion, I believe, prepared to put forward with regards to the appointment of a vice chair for the governance, human communication and human resources committee. So Dara, would you read the motion that I asked you to prepare, and then we'll look to see if someone has will move it and second it.
Yes. So the motion recommends that the governance committee approve and recommend that the board of directors approve the appointment of Debbie Douglas as vice chair of the Governance, Communications and Human Resources Committee effective July 22nd, 2021, which is the date of the next board meeting, until a successor is appointed, and authorize the general counsel and corporate secretary to take all actions to implement the above recommendation.
So if I could have a mover, Uba, to move that. Thank you. Is there a seconder? Marcel, thank you. Any questions or discussion? If none, then I'll ask all those in favor to please indicate by raising your hand. So thank you very much, Debbie, for accepting this, and for Uba for your work on this as well. Thank you. Now, item number 5, annual update on subsidiaries. With regards to committee needs to approve the subsidiary report. So we bring that up, and are you speaking to this, Sarah?
Yep.
I believe. Yeah. Thank you.
This report provides an update on general activities related to TCHC's subsidiary corporations. In terms of some of the events that I'll just highlight in the report, 2 matters to bring to your attention. One is that with respect to Don Mount Court Development Corporation, articles of dissolution have been filed with the Ministry of Government Services. We've received a certificate from the ministry certifying that the articles are effective as of February 9th of this year, and that we are currently engaged following the dissolution of that subsidiary corporation, which was created pursuant to Section 37 of 237 of the OBCA, to manage the development at Don Mount Court. That being done, we're dissolving that corporation at this point in time. And secondly, Access Housing Connections Inc. That was the subsidiary corporation of TCHC that managed the centralized wait list when that was part of our portfolio. The responsibilities in relation to that function have been transferred to the city some years ago, and so the requirement to have a separate subsidiary corporation for that function no longer exists. We are in the process dissolving the Access subsidiary, the Access Housing Connections subsidiary, and resolving with finance and outstanding accounts payable with the city in relate to that organization. And once that's done, we'll commence the process of filing articles of dissolution with the Ministry of Government Services. We've also provided as an attachment to the report a bit of an organizational chart that sets out for the committee the various subsidiaries, what they do, what membership exists as between TCHC and its development partners, and when they have been incorporated. Subject to any questions. that's our report.
Are there any questions? One question I would like, because looking at that chart is looks a bit overwhelming in terms of the number of different things to keep track of, and assuming that we do want to dispose of any committees that are subsidiaries that are not necessary. Is there a timeline that you might put forward that over the next few years, which of those corporations may be again dismantled?
So in relation to some of the corporations that we're discussing, they'll need to continue to exist because they are the title holder for various development sites, and they are the title holder when it comes to certain commercial landlord agreements that we have with tenants, commercial tenants for some of our properties. But we are in pursuing the dissolution of the Donmount Court Development Corporation and Access Housing, pursuing the kind of activity that you're describing of rationalizing the number of and reducing the number of subsidiary corporations that we have where there's no longer a need to maintain those organizations. So we can certainly go back and revisit that and provide an updated report on what other opportunities exist in that regard.
So as an example would be the energy group.
And that's a matter that's certainly the subject of discussions about whether or not TCHC will continue to engage in that activity and whether there'll be a continued need for that subsidiary corporation.
So that would be one example. Yeah. Okay, any other questions that people have with regards to subsidiaries?
Yes,
Paula?
I just want to understand that model for subsidiaries because it's quite it's complicated. Donmount Court was set up in 2000. 21 years later, we're still winding it up, and it was opened in 2007. So I just want to understand completely why we're setting them up in that way. They are subsidiaries. That one I think is different. It might be different than the others, but this notion of the subsidiaries in order to carry on, to have conducted development processes, it would be great to understand that model a bit more. If somebody could tell me, that would be great.
Was that mainly through regarding liabilities, Dara?
Yes, and typically, so when we enter into an agreement with a third-party developer to structure the development of a site, the question becomes what governance model should we use in terms of managing that activity? And a model that's typically used in that context is to create a share corporation through which the parties to the agreement jointly manage that activity. It confines any potential liability arising out of the activity to that corporation. So there are advantages from that perspective. It provides that kind of the ability for a governance model that considers the obligations that both parties to that development agreement have to each other. So that's part of the reason that it has resolved in that process. And what happens ultimately then is once the development activities are completed and there's no longer a need for the subsidiary corporation, it can be dissolved. So that's what you've seen happen this last year with Donmount Court. The question is whether that could have happened earlier. I think it might, possibly it could have in relation to that activity. We'll be proposing to create a new development corporation in relation to the new phase of the Regent Park Corporation this year, or the development this year, to support that activity. But that is, as Brian has suggested, a review that we can continue to engage to determine when we need them, when we don't, when they can be dissolved.
Yeah, there's hundreds of them, or at least dozens and dozens of them.
So I think they're laid out at the attachment to item 5.
And I assume that anything we do with a developer, they require it themselves. It's not just our initiative to have them, but the partner is requiring us to set it up that way.
That's correct.
That's the requirement from the development partner?
I think
Well,
it's,
they want to contain their liability too, right? So.
And it would also be very helpful to understand the development model, how it's funded. Because eventually through this committee, we'll be looking at the transfer, but understanding the funding of development at TCHC. I understand it's all funded, that section's funded by the developer dollars or by the project, and I would like to have a clear understanding of that.
That's also a question, Paula. I believe that maybe Dara or we could raise that, is when the development work gets transferred to the city, would any of these corporations go with it? You know,
No.
so I think that the funding question and how we fund development is a bigger question than I'm in a position to answer during this meeting.
That's right.
But we can bring that back.
I don't want it at this meeting. I want to understand that funding of that. And maybe that's, I don't think anybody's ever done that. On the other thing, Brian, everything's still in flux.
Yeah, no, I realize that, but
doing what?
But it is one question if there are things being moved over, or any of these being moved over. So at some point, not now, but at some point that's obviously something that needs to be, who's going to
Once the decision, then that will be clear where everything's going. But there's no general there's no approved model yet, Brian.
No, I realize. I was just
correct.
Wanting to keep it in our minds that we don't lose.
It's in everybody's mind, believe me.
Yeah. Okay.
But the money needs to be in everybody's mind too.
Okay. So if there is no further questions with regards to this item, I'll look for a motion to receive the annual update on subsidiaries report. Motion. Thanks, Debbie. Seconder, Marcel, thank you. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Is there any other business that anyone member has to raise? If there are no additional items to add to the meeting, today's agenda, request a motion to terminate the public meeting. Any items? No. Can I look for a motion to terminate the meeting? Uba?
Terminate. Wow, that's a heavy one, Brian.
Well, that's what my script says. Anyway.
You'll be known as the Terminator from now on.
I know.
Okay, and seconded by Debbie. All those in favor? Motion carried.
Have a wonderful day, folks.
Nice to see you.
Thanks.
Bye.
So stay safe. Bye-bye.